Hello and welcome back to another Parry This video. Today we will be taking a look into the imagination of many with the absurd hypothetical question. That question being, if you took 50 modern-day US Army Rangers, fully equipped, and sent them back in time to reinforce the Alamo, how much effect would they have? I know this sounds like a pretty silly question, but I can't be the only person that, while watching historical movies such as The Alamo, has thoughts like this. So I will be taking a look at the arms and abilities of modern warriors in battle against the best Mexico had to offer in the mid-1800s, and we'll make some assumptions on how this would or could play out. So the other day I was watching The Alamo, not the 1960 John Wayne version, which I do love. No, I was watching the 2004 Billy Bob Thornton version, which, interesting fun fact, despite actually being a pretty solid flick, which does a lot to get historical accuracy and especially authenticity right, totally flopped at the box office. And not only was this film a huge financial failure, but it also performed very poorly critically. And this is interesting because fans of the film, myself included, will often struggle to see why. The film is well made, it's entertaining and very well acted, at least for the most part, and it does a really good job of telling a difficult story in an engaging way. Plus, as I've already mentioned, the historical accuracy of the film is pretty great. They rebuilt San Antonio and the Alamo for the movie, as they would have been at the time. And for once, a Hollywood movie did a great job with period-accurate clothing and weaponry. Honestly, I really appreciate the lengths they went to with this movie, and still enjoy it very much. But anyway, I was watching this film, and about 20 minutes in, my wife was sound asleep on the couch next to me, and my mind started wandering, as it does whenever I'm watching a movie alone. And the first place it goes with a movie like this is obviously the historical significance of the event and how easy it would be to change it. If I were an all-powerful time traveler, if I could send a fully armed platoon of about 50 Army Rangers with all their equipment back to the Alamo, how far could they go in changing the outcome of this historical event? And the more thought I gave it, the more I realized that 50 Army Rangers is probably overkill. So let's get into why I think that is, and how much of a difference I think this would actually make. So to set the stage, and just in case anyone watching isn't familiar with the Siege of the Alamo, I'll give a little bit of background information. The year was 1836. Texas was not yet a part of the United States. In fact, it was actually sort of a part of Mexico. For some time at this point, the Texicans, that being the inhabitants of Texas being part of Mexico, wanted independence, and they decided to go for it. Antonio López de Santa Anna, or simply Santa Anna, was then president of Mexico, and he marched north to quell the movement for independence. He brought with him a 4,000-man army, with intentions of subduing or killing the revolutionaries and restoring Mexican authority and order in Texas. Opposed to him, and leading the army of the budding Republic of Texas, was General Sam Houston. However, he was having trouble uniting the deeply independent people of Texas into one unified fighting force, and so a quick response to Santa Anna's attack was impossible. The Alamo was an old Spanish mission, or church essentially, located in San Antonio. Other than a big cannon that was kept there, it really wasn't of that much strategic importance. However, historically it was the place that locals fled to, and so it made at least some sense to try and defend it. Or at least that was some people's thinking at the time. So on February 23rd, 1836, the 13-day siege of the Alamo would begin. The Alamo was defended by 189 men, including the three famous men, James Bowie, William B. Travis, and of course the king of the wild frontier, Senator Davy Crockett. So those who are knowledgeable in basic math may be able to tell that the less than 200 defenders against about 4,000 Mexican Army regulars were slightly outnumbered, and by the end of the 13-day siege, which concluded in a night battle, all 189 defenders were dead, and the Mexican army was victorious. However, it is estimated that between 1,000 and 1,600 Mexican soldiers were killed taking the Alamo. So for the Army of Texas, this realistically should be seen as a strategic victory, as the Mexican army spent over a quarter of their total forces taking a strategically insignificant location from less than 200 men. But in the end, that's the way it went. The 189 defenders were all killed and the Mexicans took the Alamo. Done and dusted. So what is there to talk about? Well, I think if you sent a 50-man platoon of Army Rangers to the Alamo on or before day one of the siege, not only would the defense have held, I think within a day or two the Mexican army would have been annihilated, the historical consequences of which likely would have led to an all-out invasion of Mexico, if not by the United States, then possibly by the newly formed Republic of Texas. But now, let's talk about arms and equipment. So as far as the arms of the time, I'm going to simplify this topic as there was a great deal of variety variety in what would likely have been used, but it can be averaged out to make things far simpler. There were flintlock rifles, pistols, cannons, and artillery pieces being used in this engagement. The average Mexican infantryman would have been equipped with an India pattern musket, which weighed about 10 pounds, had a 39-inch barrel, and under perfect conditions could accurately hit a target up to about 100 yards away. In formation, these rifles would effectively be used up to perhaps 300 yards. On the defender's side, there are a variety of preserved rifles from the battle, including the famous Kentucky long rifle, the U.S. Henry Derringer Model 1814 Common Rifle, the 1795 Springfield Flintlock Infantry Musket, and the French Flintlock Fusil. These varied in effectiveness, from the common rifle and the Fusil being about as effective as the Mexican-used muskets, to the Springfield and Kentucky rifles, which were far more accurate and had an effective accurate range of about 200 yards. Inside of the Alamo, there were 21 cannons. Of course, the big gun, around which the Alamo's defense was founded, was the 18-pounder that Travis used to respond to Santa Anna's call for surrender. There was also a 16-pounder, a merchant ship's iron 12-pound grenade, a 9-inch Pedrero, 2 iron 8-pounders, 6 6-pounders, 4 4-pounders, and 2 3-pounders. So the Alamo had plenty of firepower, just not really enough men to adequately defend the walls and man the gun emplacements. As for the Mexican army, we have no idea how many cannons they had with them, but given the size of the force, I would estimate it was probably a lot more than what was inside the Alamo. We do know that what they did have was artillery. Travis recorded that constant bombardment starting on the 25th took place from 2 artillery pieces. One was a 5.5-inch and the other was an 8-inch. And also, they had constant cannon barrages from 2 long 9-pounders mounted on the battery on the opposite side of the river, at a distance of about 400 yards from the Alamo's walls. Their bombardment was not very effective, however, with Travis claiming that well over 200 shells landed within the Alamo's walls without injuring a single man. So, to summarize, both sides of the engagement were mostly armed with flintlock rifles, which have an effective range of between 1 and 300 yards, and have a fire rate in competent hands of about 2 to 3 rounds per minute. There are also cannons, which require between 1 and 2 minutes to load and fire, and a standard cannon crew was about 3 men. So that is the tactical abilities of the time. Now, let's discuss what our Rangers will be bringing to the table. Our 50 Rangers will be a combat platoon drawn from the 75th Ranger Regiment. They will be kitted out for a defensive engagement and will therefore not be traveling light. Each one will be equipped with a full kit. That is, plate carriers with plates, a helmet, eye protection, gloves, a hydration system, boots, and full ammunition, which is 7 30-round magazines totaling 210 rounds of 5.56, or about 7 to 8 pounds of ammunition. For simplicity's sake, I will design the platoon specifically for Alamo defense. There will be 2 heavy machine gunners with M2 machine guns to be mounted on the walls facing Santa Anna's forces, 4 squad support machine gunners armed with M240 belt-fed machine guns, 10 snipers equipped with M24 bolt-action sniper rifles, and the remaining 34 Rangers to be equipped with M4A1 carbine rifles. Bear in mind, some of these Rangers will be utilized in the machine gun squads to reload and feed. And to make sure things don't get too easy for the defenders, we'll say for the sake of the situation that they won't have any of their mortar launchers, which they almost certainly would have otherwise. And we will minimize modern explosives because that's really not fair. So we'll leave the Stinger missiles, anti-tank weaponry, and even grenade launchers at home. Let's just say that the most explosives you would see are maybe some claymores set up near the wall for defense, and a couple of M67 frag grenades scattered amongst the troops. So what does that mean for combat effectiveness? Well, for one thing, our Rangers would likely not go down too easily, even if the Mexican muskets were able to reach them, as modern ballistic armor is designed for much higher velocity ammunition and would be very effective against musket fire. And the other thing is accuracy, effective range, and rate of fire. So starting with the M4, which is what most of our men would be equipped with, the M4 is chambered in 5.56mm rounds. It has a muzzle velocity of about 2,970 feet per second, a fire rate of between 700 and 970 rounds per minute, and a maximum effective range of about 500 meters. So over 5 times the effective range of the Mexican muskets, and a 700-ish time higher fire rate. Then we have our squad support gunners, with the M240 belt-fed machine gun, which has an effective range of about 1,800 meters and a cyclic fire rate of about 650 rounds per minute. Our heavy machine gunners with the devastating M250 caliber machine gun, which fires between 450 and 600 rounds per minute and has an effective firing range of about 1,800 meters. And lastly, our sharpshooters, equipped with their M24 bolt-action rifles, which have a pinpoint accuracy at about 800 meters and can do so at between 10 and 20 rounds per minute in the right hands. So what does all of that mean? Well, that's why I said 50 Rangers at the Alamo is overkill. 189 mostly militia of the time were able to hold out for 13 days and killed at least 1,000 of the Mexican attackers through superior guns and the defensive advantage. 50 Rangers would tip that scale so far the other way that it isn't even funny. For one thing, it would allow all of the existing defenders to concentrate their attention on the cannon emplacements and would make the fort's cannon usage a lot more consistent and effective. But realistically, I don't think the Texicans would really have that much to do. We do not know the exact range of the engagement for this battle, but what we do know is that the Mexican artillery and cannons were within 400 yards of the walls, well within the effective accurate range of the M4, and certainly an easy shot for our sharpshooters. If they managed to even fire a single shot, that would be impressive. We also know that the Mexican muskets needed to be within 300 yards to be effectively used in mass formation firing, and much closer to be considered accurate for target acquisition firing. So I honestly don't think the Mexican army would ever be in a position to threaten our force. For this engagement, I would set up the squad support gunners in defensive formations, ensuring overlapping lanes of fire for every defense vector, so no part of the wall was undefended. I would place both M2s facing the main attacking force, preferably at the corners of the Alamo, to allow for overlapping fire lanes, as well as pivot ability in the case of a concerted flank. The sharpshooters would be the cornerstone of the entire operation, placed in strategic locations and given orders to target officers, specifically Santa Ana and high-ranking officers, and cannon crew members with prejudice. The rest of the Rangers would be stationed in cover when possible, but set up in defensive formations on the walls with orders to take any clear shots they could get. I suggest that in a very short amount of time, Santa Ana and most of his command would be dead. No Mexican soldiers would want to go anywhere near the Alamo or their cannons, and with no command and an unexplainable amount of fear of dropping dead from unseen enemies, the army would rout and would go into a chaotic retreat. At this point, if it hasn't already occurred, I would say that the machine gunners could now mow down the fleeing attackers, having an effective range of nearly 2,000 yards. They would have more than enough firepower and time to annihilate the entire army in their disorganized retreat. So, with the situation as I have described it, I see no possible way that the Mexican army could achieve any sort of victory. The only two reasonable outcomes of the Battle of the Alamo, with 50 Army Rangers there, are total defeat and annihilation, unconditional surrender by the Mexicans, or a frantic retreat, and every one of these options results in 0 defender casualties, because there is simply no way the Mexican forces could ever get within range to be dangerous. So the only area for debate is, what would happen next? Well, assuming I am in control of my time-traveling ranger team, I would pull them back to the present, and prepare my next historical mission. Texas would then be in a similar position as before, except they would have held the Alamo and entirely destroyed or routed Santa Anna's army, and most likely Santa Anna himself, as well as his chief staff and senior officers, would all be dead. Mexico would be terrified of the Texan army, not knowing that it was soldiers from the future that had destroyed their 4,000-man army. I believe Mexico would either surrender entirely to Sam Houston's forces, or at least sue for peace, acknowledging Texas's independence. If not, I predict that the Republic of Texas and Mexico would enter into a protracted war, which I see Texas winning. I would bet on Texas's victory for a few reasons here. For one, they would have a serious morale advantage, and if word got out of what happened at the Alamo, no one would want to face them. So the fear factor would be incredible. In addition to this, Mexico would have lost most of their senior military leadership, as well as their president, and probably their best fighting men, so they would be on the back foot from day one of that war. Texas would see very little opposition if they pushed into Mexico, and would likely experience local support for at least 200 or 300 miles south of the Rio Grande. On top of all of this, it is almost certain that in a full-on war, US President Andrew Jackson would support Texas, and any necessary military aid would be likely. So my ultimate prediction for the overall historical impact would be a much smaller Mexico and a much bigger Texas. However, another unforeseen consequence could be that if the Republic of Texas swelled to such a size so early and had such a fearsome reputation, they may have never become a US state. and North America would look very different today. But that's all I'm going to say today regarding this ridiculous alternate history of Texas and the Alamo. I hope you enjoyed this video because I definitely enjoyed making all of this nonsense up. If you have any places you would like me to send my time-traveling rangers next, let me know in the comments section down below, and perhaps I'll send them.